So hello, welcome again to everyone for today's session. We are moving a bit away from the technicalities of motor systems and drivetrains, which was more or less the focus of the past sessions. Today, we are talking about policies, and the core of the presentations will be a policy review that has been made by the consortium partners of the EU More project. The EU More project is a live co-funded project, and João Fong from the Institute of Systems and Robotics at the University of Coimbra will soon introduce us all to this project. He will be followed by our second speaker, Ronald Piers de Raveschoot from the European Commission, the Unit of Buildings and Products. We're very glad to have Ronald amongst us. He will enlighten us on the state of play of the EU Ecodesign legislation, which is legislation that is under transition as of today. And then finally, the core of our session today is brought by Ivan Sangiorgio from the IEECP, who will give us an overview of the outcome of the review of policies for accelerated motor replacement in European member states. And after that, I will invite you all in the audience to come with your questions, and then we will try to address them all. So that's it. Busy schedule for today, so time for me to stop talking and to invite our first speaker on the screen. So João, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this Motors Academy. Let me just share my screen. So my name is João Fong, and I will be just giving you a brief introduction to the EU More project, which is a project addressing policies for the accelerated replacement of electric motors in the European Union. It is a project co-funded by the LIFE program. So the problem that we identified and are trying to address is that, electric motors, as we know, are responsible for a large part of the consumption of electricity in Europe. So over 70% in the industrial sector. And there are a lot of old motors with very poor efficiency still in service today, despite the introduction of minimum performance standards for motors under the Ecodesign directive. So because motors have a long lifetime, the replacement rate is slow. So even considering the expected lifetimes of 12, 15, and 20 years for small, medium, and large motors, we can still see here that around 70% of motors installed are still below I2 level. And we have reasons to believe that these lifetimes can be even longer. So there was a Swiss study that identified that audited motors in Swiss companies, and the lifetimes largely exceeded these expected lifetimes. And the recent EU market, United States market assessment also identified a large number of motors working past beyond their lifetime. So we can expect this number of old motors, inefficient motors, to be even larger. And this presents a big opportunity to increase the energy efficiency of these motors by replacing them. And it presents an opportunity also to, at the time of replacement, to do optimize not only the electric motor, but also optimize the entire system, and then these savings would be even larger. So a rough estimation would be of just replacing the motor would give us a saving of around 25 terawatt hours per year. and of course, optimizing the entire motor system, the savings would be around 75 terawatt hours per year. Of course, this is the maximum potential, so we cannot address all motors, of course, by introducing new policies, but at least a part of this be addressed. And so the EU more project trying to address this issue by developing new policies for and strategies for accelerating this replacement of old motors. And we are doing so by gathering data on the existing motors and developing new strategies by promoting also knowledge exchange between policymakers and other stakeholders within the EU. And also we are trying to address also circular economy aspects within these policies. And we started by doing an assessment of the motor market in Europe. So what is the current status of the installed base of electric motors? We also did a policy review, which Ivan will be addressing in more detail later today. We did also an analysis of efficiency trends in motors and motor systems that to see how far we can go. And we are also carrying out an analysis of the current end-of-life practices for old for electric motors to see also what can be improved in this respect. And we take these findings and are starting now to develop new policies. This is done in cooperation with stakeholders at member state level. So we are promoting co-creation workshops where we can discuss the policy and recommendations and strategies that we've developed within the project. So this is a continuous process. We also have a knowledge exchange platform online at the EU More site. I'll be sharing the link also in this presentation, where we are trying also to promote this knowledge exchange and sharing of insights and experience through this knowledge exchange platform. And we are developing tools to help member states and policymakers project the impacts of the policies that implemented and also monitor their results. And as I said, we are also trying to align these policies with circular economy. So you can join this discussion by going to the EU More website and seeing there what we have done so far, and also joining this knowledge exchange platform. You can sign up for this Motor Policy Forum or the multi-stakeholder platform. The Motor Policy Forum is more directed at policymakers, and the multi-stakeholder platform is directed at all other stakeholders. And we can also sign up there for the newsletter, and you can receive updates on the progress of the project. And we are also carrying out an online survey. It will only take 10 minutes to fill this survey out with the purpose of understanding better what are the main barriers now that motor replacement phases. So we are hoping to understand better why motors are kept in use for so long. And we hope to that understanding these barriers will help us develop better policy recommendations. So just to say that this project has 6 partners, and we are now mainly addressing these 6 member states. But of course, we are open to discussing this policy with other member states. So feel free to contact us if you want to cooperate with us in hopefully unleashing this large energy efficiency potential. So thank you. I will be posting the link to the survey on barriers on the chat, so you can just click it and then fill it out. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, João. And indeed, the link is already there in the chat. So
great.
No worries there. Okay, meanwhile, let me try to bring up Ronald's presentation. So happy to have Ronald Piers from the Buildings and Products Unit at the DG Enner with us. So Ronald.
Voila, okay, now I can do.
There we go. So the floor is yours, Ronald.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And it's my pleasure to make you a brief introduction on the state of play of the EU Ecodesign legislation, and in particular, the legislation that concerns motors and motor systems. Next slide, please. So probably most of you know what Ecodesign is. It's a well-established regulatory framework that allows the Commission to set minimum efficiency requirements for energy-related products, which is defined as any good that has an impact on energy use, on energy consumption during use. On this basis, we can adopt regulation that regulate the energy efficiency or other environmental parameters for these energy-related products. Thank you. Next slide. So why we do this? I think it's always good to recall why we are doing this. And I think we are well aware of these objectives, but it's good to remind them. Of course, there is the climate change and the Green Deal with an important ambition of the Commission to become carbon neutral by 2050. There is also the ambition to have a more circular economy with the Circular Economy Action Plan. There is also the current geopolitical context with the war in Ukraine and pressure on energy prices and the importance of the EU to be more energy independent. The will to empower customers. And in this context, Ecodesign and its twin instrument, energy labeling, are key instruments. And 2 years ago, the Commission has adopted several important pieces of legislation. They're not all legislation, but it has adopted an Ecodesign working plan for the next 4 years. Now we are getting into that working plan. There will be a new one coming under a new legal framework. And this is the second point there, a proposal for a new regulation on Ecodesign for sustainable products. And I will discuss that a bit more in detail later. Next slide. So we have about 50 measures in place. And I've put in bold those that concern, let's say, more this industrial product we are talking about today. Of course, the electric motors themselves, the variable speed drives, but also industrial products such as water pumps and industrial fans. Next slide. All these legislation bring very important benefits and contribution to our policy objectives in terms of energy savings, in terms of reduced CO2 emissions, but also other pollutants. and also important savings for the customers. And I really like to present these figures. In 2020, we expect a reduction of, we had an estimated reduction of 56 billion euro to be increased by 150 billion euro in 2030. So a very important savings also for the energy users through this policy instrument. Next slide, please. I mentioned this legislation, the regulation for eco-design for sustainable products, which is now in a very advanced stage in the sense that it is now to be adopted. So there was a political deal in December, and the adoption is expected in the coming weeks, probably sometimes in July. And what does it do, this regulation? It will replace the current legal frameworks, the current Ecodesign directive, and it will enable the setting of requirements for almost all categories of physical goods. It could be furniture, textile. It doesn't need to be energy related. Any type of good can be related in order to become more sustainable. And the type of requirements will be broader. It will include product durability, reusability, upgradability, repairability. We can also regulate the presence of substance that inhibit circularity. Of course, energy and resource efficiency will remain important for the product for which it is indeed a criterion. Recycled content, carbon and environmental footprint, and information requirement also, including through a digital product passport. The legislation will also improve the current framework on several aspects, including improving some aspects related to market surveillance, and there are some transitional measures for the regulations adopted under the current framework. So the legislation adopted the current framework will stay in place, and the impact, there will be limited impact on this legislation under the new framework. And I've provided the link here on the the information of the political deal. Next slide, please. Now, back to more focus on industry with electric motors, drives, fans, and pumps. Next slide. So these four product groups bring substantial energy savings. This kind of wheel shows the energy savings of the different product groups covered by eco-design and energy labeling. And these industrial products are there in dark blue, and they cover about 12% of the total saving, meaning 176 terawatt hours per year, which is really a significant, very significant figure. Next slide. So there is a regulation in place, that is the famous regulation 2019/1781 that replaced an older regulation from 2009. It entered into application in July 21, and it covers a broader scope than the previous regulation. It covers only induction motors between 0.12 kilowatts until 1000 kilowatts, motors with 2 to 8 poles, both single phase and three-phase, and both 50 Hz and 60 Hz motors, with some exemptions, and you will find the detail in the regulation. And it also covers variable speed drives with three-phase input and rated for operation of the motors that are in scope. Next slide. This is a graph showing the energy efficiency classes of electric motors and what are the current requirements for these motors. So between 0.12 and 0.75 kilowatts, it's the level IA2. Between 0.75 and 1000 kilowatts, it is IA3 for three-phase motors, because it stays IA2 for single-phase motors. And there is here a range between 75 and 200 kilowatts, where since 2023, the level required is IA4, which is a world premiere. The EU is the first region or entity that requires such level, but it's interesting to see that others are following, and in the US there will be similar requirements, but in a much later time, in 2027. Next slide. A very important element is that in this regulation, we have added information requirements about performance of motors and drives at part load and part speed. And the purpose is to enable the calculation and the optimization of electric motor system efficiency at different load and speed. And this has a large potential savings because when motors are driven at lower speed and lower load, of course, they use much less energy. And this is, of course, possible through variable speed drive. And these information requirements are there to pass a message. I think that is important, is that even if this regulation only regulates the efficiency of motors, it is important to have also the global picture and look at the efficiency of a motor system and see how the motor can be driven, can be operated in order to minimize the energy use of that system. Next slide. So what are the next steps? We are now about to embark in the review of this regulation. We were meant to address the proposal in November 2023, but we did not. We will start only the study this year. And the Article 9 of the regulation specifies what are the elements that need to be considered in its review. And it includes, in first place, resource efficiency requirement, including identification of rare earth in permanent magnet motors, the level of the verification tolerances, possibly setting stricter requirements for motors and variable speed drives, setting requirements for high voltage motors, setting requirements for a combination of motors and variable speed drive when they are placed on the market together as a type of compact drive. We'll also look at the exemptions, possibly adding other motors in scope, for example, the permanent magnet motors, and other aspects such as system losses directly associated with the VSD are some of the aspects we would like to look like. But this review will take place in the new legal framework, meaning we will have to look at additional aspects, such as the substance of concern, more focus on circularity. All the aspects I mentioned before will have to be looked at and see what type of requirements, depending on let's say, the different impact, what type of requirements we'll have to put on motors. So all this will be looked at, and we expect to kick off in the second half of this year. Next slide, please. A few words on two other products, water pump and fans. There is ongoing measure for water pumps that dates from 2012 that regulates several types of water pumps. It only covers the hydraulic part, not the electric motor or the drive. So in the review, we intend to have a more global index that includes motor and drive. Next slide, please. And a particularity of the conclusion of the review study is that for water pumps, variable speed drive have a very important role to play, even in constant load applications. So we are devising an energy efficiency index that would really favor the use of a variable speed drive, and it would probably be quite difficult to meet the requirements if you don't have one. And this regulation now is also well advanced. We are preparing for inter-service consultation, by which there will be an official commission proposal that will be presented for feedback in the fourth quarter of this year, with a possible adoption and publication in the first half of 2025, I would say by the summer, something like that. Now, for industrial fans, there is also a regulation in place that covers several types of fan between 125 watts and 500 kilowatts, and it's also under revision at a very well advanced stage, since the adoption is expected in the coming weeks. Next slide. you went too fast. So in that regulation, we are addressing a few issues, extending the scope, increasing the requirements. I will not go into detail, just to show that we are all, the little graph on the corner. This is also information requirements at variable speed and low, or variable flow and pressure. This is also, again, in the same purpose, to enable optimizing of the fan system. So we would have the data of the fan in order to optimize the system. Next slide. And this is a graph showing how we have increased the requirements. In blue, these are the current requirements. In red are the new requirements. This is an example for axial fans, and you can see that the increase is quite significant, but it is smaller for smaller fans because the possibilities to improve efficiency are more limited. Next slide. A last word on another piece of legislation, which is the Energy Efficiency Directive. There is a new version recast from 2023. And in its Annex 5, it provides common methods and principles for calculating the impact of energy efficiency obligation schemes or other policy measures under different articles of that legislation. And the point 1 of that annex provides methods for calculating energy savings other than those arising from taxation measures. And it says that obligated participating and untrusted parties or implementing public authorities, all those that are concerned by this legislation, by these articles, may use the following methods for calculating energy savings. And there is a list of methods, and one of them mentions the replacement of electric motors. This is why I thought it would be worth to mention it. So it's the point C, where scaled saving are mentioned, and I will explain what it is, whereby engineering estimates can be used, but only where established robust measured data for a specific installation is difficult or disproportionately expensive. For example, when replacing a compressor or an electric motor with a different power rating from that for which independent information about saving has been measured. This means concretely is that if the savings have been assessed, for example, for a motor with a rated power of 100 kilowatts, you can calculate, make an engineering estimate of what it would be if you want also to replace a 200 kilowatt motors in similar conditions. That's basically what this specific provision says. Voila, I hope that was clear enough, and I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your case question a bit later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ronald. And indeed, we've meanwhile got some questions, but let's take them after the presentation by Ivan. And I think you made a perfect bridge to Ivan's presentation by showing this last slide on the Energy Efficiency Directive provisions for motor replacement, because that exactly has been one of the starting points for the study that IEECP has made. So, Ivan, if I can invite you on.
Thank you, Diedert, and thank you to the audience for attending this webinar. My name is Sangiorgio, and I'm a junior expert at the Institute for European Energy and Climate Policy, IEECP. We are partners of the EU More Life project, and we were responsible for the review of policies for accelerated motor replacement in the European Union. I would like to firstly describe which were the objectives of this review. So the review comes in parallel with an analysis of the motor market in the European Union. And the review is supposed to build the foundations for the design of new policies to foster the replacement of electric motors in the industrial and service sectors in the European Union. And the review also allows to assess which are the policy requirements in the European member states needed to speed up the renovation of the electric motor stock. we have some background initiatives, similar initiatives to this review. In particular, reviews and mapping of energy efficiency policies have already been conducted in scientific literature and grey literature. For our policy review, an important starting point was provided by the Odyssey Muir project, which developed a database of policies implemented in the EU. The database is called the Muir database, and it allows to look for policies according to the targeted sector, the targeted end use, the country, and so on. So the EU Muir policy review built upon these results provided by the Muir database in part, but with a specific focus on actions targeting motor replacement in the European Union. So which were the scope and the focus of the review? So as already said, the review consisted in the analysis of policies which are or were supporting the replacement of old inefficient motors or the upgrade of motor systems. And the policies could support these actions both directly and indirectly. So we included in the review both cross-cutting programs and more specific policy measures, let's say. As said, the analyzed policies are mostly targeting the industrial and service sectors, although specific policy measures with a focus on motors were included also if targeting the, for instance, municipalities or the residential sector. And let's say the analyzed policies are both past, current, and planned policies. So the analysis covers past, present, and future policies considered by the EU member states. So for what concerns the methodology adopted for the review, the review is based on the contribution of several country experts. So let's say professionals with knowledge, specific national knowledge on policy framework. And for each of the 27 European member states, the three following aspects were analyzed. So in first place, the general policy framework of the member states. The country expert was asked to describe the major national programs and measures, also referring to national energy and climate plans. Secondly, a general evaluation of actions concerning the replacement of motors was included. And lastly, in third place, the relevant policy measures for electric motors had to be listed and described. In particular, for this third last aspect, the following methodology was adopted. So for each of the analyzed policy measures in each member state, an overview of the measure was provided. So we were interested in understanding who was the responsible authority, so both the issuing and the managing authority of the program, the status of the measure, so if it was ended or still ongoing or planned for the future, which were the issue date, start date, and ending date, so to define the temporal coverage of the policy. And then to include reference sources of information, which were mainly based on, let's say, public available sources from national authorities, energy agencies, and so on. Secondly, for each policy measure, a set of characteristics and properties had to be listed and described. So the allocated budget, the public budget allocated for the program, the source of financing, so how the program was financed, and at let's say at a policy level, which was the focus of the policy. So physical intervention, so for instance, replacement of machinery and motors, or an intervention more focused on a service level, so providing information and trainings to companies and professionals, which were the key barriers and drivers for the implementation of the policy measure, and how the replicability was seen. So if the replicability of the measure was high, medium, or low. Finally, for each policy measure, the impacts had to be described. So in first place, the impact on the case level, so energy consumption at the, for instance, in this specific company or industrial site had to be estimated in a qualitative manner, as well as the policy level impact, so the impact on the final energy consumption of the member state, also in this case on a qualitative level. Finally, from a quantitative point of view, the impact on energy savings and avoided greenhouse gas emissions had to be described, and also the impact on the number of motors replaced, which was our main objective for the analysis. And I can anticipate that this last piece of data was the most difficult to find. So from publicly available sources and from policies directly targeting motors, it was really difficult to retrieve data concerning the number of motors replaced and the efficiency of those motors. So for what concerns the analysis of the results, all the analyzed policy measures, analyzed according to the previous described criteria, were categorized according to the type of the measure and the targeted audience or subsector, let's say. So for the measure type, we based our categorization upon the MUR database. So we categorize the measures according to these categories. So mandatory standards, financial measures divided in subsidies, subsidies and loans, combinations of subsidies and loans, fiscal measures, market-based instruments, information and trainings measures, policy measures, and voluntary agreements. For what concerns instead the targeted audience, the categories identified were, of course, the industrial sector, also divided according to SMEs and large companies and energy-intensive companies. Other secondary sectors that were sometimes addressed by the policies were the municipalities, the service sector, and the residential sector. But for what concern policies addressing all sectors, usually these policies excluded the transport. So transport sector was, let's say, neglected and excluded from these categories. Regarding the results in terms of type of measures, as we can see from this pie chart, there is a strong predominance of financial measures, so loans, subsidies, but also fiscal measures. While, for instance, information programs and training programs are few, especially if focused on the topic of electric motor replacement. Voluntary agreements have quite a high predominance. but still, we can say that financial measures were, of course, predominant in this analysis. And also I have to mention that the total number of measures analyzed was 64 for all the 27 EU member states. And depending on the criteria adopted by the country experts that analyze the measures, it is possible that some regional programs or some minor programs were not included in the analysis. But our objective is to continuously update the review to include both new measures and measures that we could have neglected. For what concerns the geographical, let's say, distribution of measures involving electric motors, we can see that Germany and Austria were the front runners. Again, this could be related both to the number of policies that were implemented, but also to the criteria adopted by the policy reviewers for the inclusion of the policies. For some countries, such as Italy and France, all the actions addressing motor innovation can be considered as part of the white certificate schemes. So that is why in specific countries, the number of policies is very low, but this has not to be correlated with the impact of these policies on the on motor innovation issues, let's say. Here we have a very preliminary estimation of the impact of the analyzed measures. So what we tried to do was, based on the evaluation of the country reviewers, which were qualitative evaluations of the impact of the policies on the final energy consumption at national level, we tried to link these impact evaluations to the targeted sectors and to the final energy consumption of the targeted sectors, to try to provide an order of magnitude, a proxy of the impact on the final energy consumption for different categories of the analyzed policies. Of course, since financial policies were dominant, these were resulted to have the highest aggregated impact. But as said, this has to be intended as a purely, let's say, preliminary and indicative evaluation of the impacts of such policies. For what concerns the discussion around the results, as said, subsidies, loans, and fiscal measures, so policies addressing financial barriers of motor replacement, are predominant, resulted to be predominant from our analysis. And non-subsidy policies, such as mandatory standards and mandatory information, like energy audit obligation or informational measures, only represent about 1/3 of the analyzed policies. So this allows us to say that implementation barriers are not adequately addressed by these policies, and this is particularly relevant for SMEs, which may be subject to these kind of barriers. Also, motor replacement actions are generally included in the general programs, so cross-cutting energy efficiency programs. And what we noticed from the analysis of the measures, of the policy measures, is that usually actions related to motor replacement are described with two generic criteria. So in the best cases, criteria are set in terms of efficiency of the motor replacing the old motors or the let's say power ranges, but often cross-cutting programs tend to mention generically energy efficiency measures able to lead to this kind of this amount of energy savings or GHG savings. So we recognize this gap to be filled in the policy framework. And also, very few national policies tend to include systemic approaches to motor systems. So, for instance, in the optimization of the supply and demand side related to motor-driven systems, for instance. And this is, let's say, a drawback, since as we managed to understand from case studies, this kind of systemic approaches usually lead to the highest energy savings. So this is another gap that has to be filled by our policy recommendations. I would now go on with a couple of remarkable policies that we identified concerning motor replacement actions. So the first one is the energy investment allowance in the Netherlands, which is administered by Netherlands Enterprise Agency, RBO, and which substantially consists in a tax deduction for energy saving investments of 45% of the investment costs. The eligible investments, the eligible energy efficiency measures, are listed in the official energy list, which is continuously updated by RBO. And in this case, the energy list includes very explicit and specific criteria for the replacement of motors, which I listed here below. I will not go into the details, but these motor replacement actions are foreseen by the energy investment allowance, and very specific criteria are set so that users can also be informed on the possible eligible actions related to motors. The second remarkable policy I would like to mention is the energy efficiency promotion plan in Portugal, which substantially consisted in an incentive mechanism of 51% of the total installation cost. Regarding motors, the 6th edition of this policy, which was active between 2017 and 2018, included a measure to support the replacement of sub-IE1 motors, so very inefficient motors, in the power range 0.75 to 400 kilowatts. And these inefficient motors could be replaced with IE3 or IE4 motors. The total budget of the policy measure was of the program was 900 kilo euros, and the results in terms of replaced motors was 420 motors replaced. Estimated electricity savings achieved of 115 gigawatt hours, and avoided emissions of 43,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. So all these considerations, the results from the policy review, the methodology, are described in the policy review report, which is available on the project website. So the report provides an overview of the policies for each member state. So there is a very long annex for, let's say, listing the policy measures and description of policy frameworks for each of the European member states. There is the policy impact analysis that I briefly mentioned in this presentation, whereas the identification of best practices and identification of barriers and shortcomings. And as said, there are sub-reports for all the 27 member states. So it is a quite extensive repository of energy efficiency policies in the EU with a specific focus on motors. Regarding policies implemented outside the European Union, we are currently including non-EU policies involving motors in our analysis. So there will be an update of the policy review report in this regard. But let's say a very important program that was let's say issued by the United States by the Department of Energy is a program related to the minimum energy performance standards of motors, which will apply since 2027 to single-speed induction motors that will be manufactured or imported into the US. So this is let's say a program related to mandatory standards for motors in the US. Interesting are the estimations of the electricity savings for this kind of for these mandatory standards, which are 880 terawatt-hour of electricity savings and 0.9 megaton CO2 avoided. For what concerns instead closer countries, we have found an interesting example of a program tackling and addressing informational barriers, which is the energy technology list managed by the UK, issued by the UK government. This list is a list of energy efficient products and machinery. Among these products, let's say we can find boilers, air conditioning equipment, refrigeration equipment, but also electric motors. In particular, this list, which is available on a public website, enables say customers to get in contact with the manufacturers to see which are the most efficient motors and which are their characteristics in terms of type of motor, technical parameters, presence of a variable speed drive, and so on. So we found this this program interesting since it really enables users to let's say get in contact with manufacturers, but also see which are the possible options for replacing old motors. So we will take into account this this kind of approach in our future policy recommendations. I'm finally at the end of this presentation and I will mention that the policy review report is uploaded in the downloads section of the project website. But we also have, as my colleague João previously mentioned in his presentation, we also have the forum and the knowledge exchange platform. And I have here a short video showing what you can find on the forum. So, so far we have listed and described some of the exemplary policy measures addressing motors for each or for several European member states. So what you can find is, of course, a description of the measure and a description of the details concerning motor replacement actions foreseen by the measure. You can also leave a reply and comment if you find any error in our analysis, or anything you would like us to describe better or to to focus on furtherly. Finally, brief mention to our future work. As said, there will be a continuous update of the policy measures repository, so including future and future measures, but also measures that we have neglected in our analysis, and also an update of the general policy frameworks for the member states since the new national energy and climate plans will be published soon, we will incorporate the updates in our policy report. We will be involved in a co-creation process for policies in close contact with the policymakers. And we will try to model and project the impacts of our policy recommendations, our, let's say, newly designed policies in terms of energy and greenhouse gas emissions impacts. So that was it for my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much for the attention.